In the research piece that accompanies this video, we started out by questioning what percentage of cannabis investors dabble in the product, the idea being that people that understand the potential are probably users. In the same token, we were wondering how many people that think there's a lot of potential for psychedelic stocks have dabbled. Now, I can recall several decades ago or more, the first time that I'd ever tried LSD, the only thing I could think of was that it would be a royal shame that a lot of people on this planet would never experience just how powerful this particular chemical is. And if you've ever dabbled in psychedelics, you know that it's pointless to try and explain just how impactful these sorts of substances can be. And I believe it was Robin Williams that correctly said reality is just a crutch for people who can't handle drugs. And when we talk about psychedelics, there are quite a few out there, but I just wanted to list some here. There's mushrooms, and these are probably pretty benign. They're what they say on the tin. Don't try to pick them fresh. You always buy from somebody that knows what they're doing. Then you've got acid. This comes in little strips, and they're usually wrapped in plastic so it doesn't bleed through. And I think these days you can probably buy acid for around $5 a dose, mushrooms maybe $100 an ounce. These items are particularly accessible now because of the power of the internet. Then you have ketamine, colorless liquid or a powder, ayahuasca. So you see a lot of people going down to South America to go on ayahuasca retreats. And I think there was a famous quarterback in the States who said that his game has never been better since he did that. You've got peyote. That's not so common. And then one I think that few people have heard of, but I really enjoy bringing it up because it's extremely is a remarkable substance, is a plant called Salvia divinorum. It's from the mint family, and I remember learning about it and going up to Camden Town in London and trying it for the first time, and I poked my head into an alley and puffed a little bit off a pipe, and I came to sitting in the middle of a sidewalk with a busy sidewalk with people walking around me, and I had no idea how I got there, but it's really something that you shouldn't try without a sitter. It's just a remarkable plant. You get about 35, 40 seconds of just the most crazy things that you can imagine in the world around you, and then you're back to normal. So hallucinogens are quite fun when used responsibly. And some people happen to think that there's a huge opportunity here for therapeutics. And again, if you've experienced the power of psychedelics, then you would understand that they can probably do a whole lot for people with mental health problems. And this theory has been propped up by notable names like Peter Thiel, Shark Tank's Kevin O'Leary. He says that he thinks there's hundreds of billions of dollars worth of value here and that eclipses the cannabis opportunity. And it's becoming increasingly acceptable to mainstream society to talk about usage. It's actually quite trendy these days, and you'll see in a lot of podcasts people talking about it, or celebrities or influencers saying that they microdose, things like that. And then for big pharma, the question here is there an opportunity or a threat? The opportunity is really an unmet needs. So anything that can't be treated that psychedelics could potentially treat, that's an opportunity to make some money. And of course, it's a threat. So if psychedelic therapies can displace the giant antidepressant drug market, then that's a problem, unless, of course, the psychedelics can be priced at a higher price point. So when we look at psychedelic stocks, there's actually 4, I couldn't believe it, psychedelic ETFs now, and the largest is from Horizons. I think it has about 18 million US in AUM. That's practically nothing. And here we've pulled out the 10 psychedelic stocks in the ETF minus J&J and AbbVie, which certainly aren't pure plays on psychedelic therapies. But we've pulled these out. You can see the 4 largest here. Of these, we've covered 3. These happen to be the 3 that Kevin O'Leary talks highly about and has invested in. And those names are Compass, Atai, and Mind Medicine. And you can see here that we've written pieces. I think this was in last year. We wrote about each of these companies. And I was just going to quickly summarize kind of what we concluded. So Atai is rather interesting. The founder was inspired by a mushroom trip and took some of the money from his $750 million family office and started buying up intellectual property in the psychedelic therapy space. They're working with loads of partners across various compounds and indications. And when I say partners, caveat that by saying none of these appear to be large pharmaceutical companies. A lot are small firms that they snapped up that are in various phases of development. So it's quite a rabbit hole of a stock to get into in terms of researching it. Then you have Compass. Their lead candidate targets treatment-resistant depression, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Mainly people who have depression, 30% of them, it's not treatable. So that's an opportunity to potentially be captured. Compass's intellectual property is synthetic psilocybin and the process to produce that. And they need a big pharma partner. Actually, all these companies need a big pharma partner, and that's potentially a problem. We'll talk about why. Then you have MindMed. They just did a reverse split because their shares are falling so much. Presumably, they want to stay listed on the exchange. Their lead candidate is this LSD compound, and when you peruse their site, it's a jack of all trades. They think it can cure everything except cancer, and they've got a list of studies going on, and it really appears to be a firm that just doesn't have a solid focus. Again, a pharma partner could probably help with that. Now, Mr. O'Leary thinks that all three of these firms should merge because doing studies is quite expensive, and there's a concern there, especially now in the bear market, around survivability. So two of these firms are working on, as we said, treatment-resistant depression. Here's something that's really interesting. So this was taken from Business Insider. It shows the countries in the world with the most usage of antidepressants, United States being at the top. There's no surprise. United States is one of two countries in the world where pharma companies can advertise directly to consumers. And it's funny, I think on television the other day I saw they actually have a drug that's being marketed to treat the side effects of another drug. It's almost like an article in The Onion. You would think it's a joke, but it's not. So these are the top consumers, these countries, consumers of antidepressants. I've marked in yellow the countries that are listed as the 10 happiest. So you see the 20 happiest countries in the world. Of those, 9 take a great deal of antidepressants. Now you could say, well, the reason that they're happy is because they're taking antidepressants. Or you could say, well, perhaps depression is something that's being created by pharmaceutical companies as a first world problem that needs to be treated. Life is tough, right? And times things can be quite depressing. We're certainly not dismissing the mental health needs of people, but there's something to be said for this piece that was published in Scientific American that talks about how many antidepressant studies were found to be tainted by pharma company influence. So the question is, can psychedelics provide an alternative to antidepressants? Well, big pharma is certainly not going to be happy about that unless they can make some money. So a lot of people were saying that pharma was very dismissive about the potential of psychedelics until a pharmaceutical company developed a drug, and it's the first that we're aware of, FDA-approved drug that uses ketamine to treat depression. So ketamine is actually a compound with 2 mirror image molecules. Well, Janssen, they're a division of Johnson & Johnson. They patented the left part of that molecule, sent it through the FDA approval system as a potential cash cow. And what it is a low-dose nasal spray formulation of ketamine, and it's designed to be administered in the presence of a healthcare practitioner. And it was approved on the basis of 5 pivotal phase 3 studies in patients with treatment-resistant depression. So we have a ketamine-based drug that's been approved and that's being used. So the success of this will be watched very closely by other pharma companies that are thinking of dabbling in this space. It's called Spravato, and there are a couple things here that stand out which make it seem less than desirable. First of all, it has to be taken with an oral antidepressant. Well, that kind of defeats the purpose there. And then you can see here it says, in a clinical trial after 16 weeks of therapy, and this is a drug that costs $4,700 for the first month, and then somewhere around $2,000 to $3,000 for each month afterwards. The patients were, quote, less likely to experience a return of depressive symptoms than those who stopped therapy. And you see here the verbiage is important. It says patients who continued Spravato treatment. So after you take this nasal spray, then you have to stay in your healthcare provider's office for at least 2 hours so they can monitor you. And it just doesn't seem very compelling. And indeed, you can see here we pulled this paragraph from an article by Pharmaceutical Technology from several months ago. It says that Spravato has struggled to gain market traction because of its high price, abuse potential, difficult to find providers. It's difficult to get insurance companies to reimburse it. So that's certainly something that's being paid attention to. And it's worth noting that ketamine has actually been used as a treatment because it's FDA approved for general anesthetic. Ketamine has been used in ketamine clinics already to treat TRD, but of course, it's not reimbursed by insurance companies because that's not an indication that's been approved for, but you can go in and get a ketamine shot, and they do offer that treatment independent of this FDA-approved drug from Johnson & Johnson. So that begs the question, well, what about just going out and getting these substances and treating yourself? And a lot of people seem to be doing that. There's a big trend in society now. If you do a little research around it, you can see how popular it is. It's called microdosing. It was all the rage in Silicon Valley. People were microdosing acid and mushrooms or whatever substance they could get their hands on. And there was a study done here fairly recently. It talks about how adults who microdose psychedelics report health-related motivations, lower levels of anxiety and depression compared to people who don't. So this is actually a double-edged sword. Some people, as the CEO of MindMed said, believe that the societal adoption of psychedelics actually counters their use of a therapy, because then people start to see it as a recreational drug, which is bad, and they don't want to do that. So they don't want anything to do with taking ketamine for treatment-resistant depression. So there's that stigma associated with it, which some claim increases as people push for legalization of psychedelics. So in Oregon now, mushrooms are legal, so you can take them and do whatever you want with them. It's not something that you can get in trouble for, and there's possibly legalization efforts taking place as well. There's some cities in the U.S. where it's legal, but in Europe, I think in Amsterdam, I know you can take mushrooms in Amsterdam because I've done that in coffee shops before, but I don't know about the legalities in terms of therapies. But just to conclude, successful psychedelic therapies will need to target unmet needs. So they need to get revenue that's not being captured, because if they try to cannibalize the antidepressant market, that's not going to fly unless they can charge higher price points, which is probably why Johnson & Johnson was criticized for their pricing. And of course, as we said, mainstream acceptance and increasing usage by the public, that's a double-edged sword. But it all comes down to this. This is perhaps the most important thing to note. These psychedelic therapy developers, all 10 that we looked at earlier, or the 3 that we've drilled into, and I'll put links to those research pieces in the description of this video, they need big pharma partnerships to show validation. And right now, big pharma's watching the success of Spravato from Johnson & Johnson, a company that has not talked about the results. So it was supposed to be a cash cow. They haven't said anything about how much of it they've been selling, and it remains to be seen whether or not that's a success. If it is, it's likely that other drug companies will possibly move in to try and get a piece of the pie. If it's not a success, then it doesn't seem like there's a lot of potential for these companies, or at least as much as Mr. Kevin O'Leary is claiming. So please put your comments in the comment section, subscribe to our channel, send our videos out, please, to your friends and family, that people that you think might find these topics interesting. Help us build our channel. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video today.